Talmud and going over it and stuff. But I know Rambam was known for being a rationalist.
Yeah, I would be interested to know what they meant by too rational.
Yeah, and I didn't get time to go into it because there's a lot of people around. But it was
Right.
it was at Ohev. So I forget his name. It's the new rabbi they had there.
Oh, yes, the interim rabbi, yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my guess is that he might have been trying to suggest that you should be wary of thinking that, for example, Aristotelian logic might be the standard way of reading it. There is internal logic within Talmudic discussion that works within rabbinic discussions. You know, we've been coming across, for example, recently Kal V'chomer, the all the more so argument. And that type of argument works within rabbinic analysis, and as a general rule is fine in other as well. But the way it's used in rabbinic analysis is not, it's not exactly comparable to how it might be used in other places. And the rabbis are very clear that there are certain types of arguments that are, according to the 13 principles of hermeneutics, that are binding, but those same principles could be used after the period of the early Tanaim, and that would not necessarily make it binding in a new situation. So the logic is not 100% universally applicable to every situation. There is an element of tradition that goes hand in hand with the logic. That means you can't only study it through the lens of logic.
Yeah, and the example I had was Shemitah, and it was the reasoning behind not being able to sell Shemitah. And I can't remember if I read this or made it up, but it was my understanding you can't sell the seventh year produce because it's ownerless and it belongs to the poor. Therefore, since it's ownerless, you can't sell it. And I told him that was my logic on why you can't sell Shemitah.
Right. And I can see if that was what you were suggesting, and he responded, as you mentioned, by being worried about being overly rational, then it's a topic that you and I have discussed as well, that while it's fine to hunt for general principles, we shouldn't expect our hunt to always be fruitful, to use a Shemitah term. That it's perfectly possible that things may appear to be inconsistent because the logic of the Talmud is following a different pattern than what we have been able to deduce. And that's okay. And that's why we do adhere to the Talmud, even if we are still scratching our heads on certain passages. And we try to come up with general rules, but our general rules do not override their particular rulings.
Right. And and my theory was if there is a difference, do they try to distinguish, you know, this is a general rule, this is the ruling from the Talmud, and this is why it doesn't apply in this case. So even when you get into the specifics that are different than the general rules, sometimes you try to look to the rationale of why it's different. Or is that like a bad way to look at this?
I would hesitate to use the word bad. I would just say unproductive.
That means bad.
Well, no, it's not bad, because trying to figure out a general rule can be helpful as a mental shorthand, but you have to be really prepared to jettison it if you find a particular ruling that contradicts it. So, you know, it's good to say, okay, so in general, the rabbis seem to be protecting principle A. And then you come to a ruling where principle A seems to be not the priority. You have to be ready to say, okay, maybe there are exceptions, or maybe there are other principles that are at work here. And so that means my theory is not sufficient. The same way that a modern scientist in doing scientific method has to be prepared to let go of the hypothesis when he or she comes across data which contradicts it, rather than, you know, complaining that the data is wrong. The rabbis want us to try and deduce, yes, some of these principles, but the particular is always what's most important.
So was what I said about Shemitah wrong?
I don't know that it's wrong, but I also don't know that that is a universal opinion. It doesn't mean that in every other circumstance where something is ownerless that we're unable to sell it. Because, for example, there are lost objects that become ownerless because it's impossible for them to be claimed. and we would not say that you couldn't sell those objects. They become the property of the person who finds them. So, that rule wouldn't work in 100% of situations.
But in that situation, then they're no longer ownerless, so they become the property of the person who found them. Now they just take on a different owner.
Right, but in Shemitah, you would have to account for why does it not become, why is it that you cannot own it? And that has to do, of course, with the idea that you are unable to own the produce during that year permanently. Permanently for that year. Noel, I see your hand is up.
It's not related to Shemitah. As a former goat rancher, I'm just very curious why you chose your background.
So the background for my day, I didn't know you were a former goat rancher, but I grew up with goats. So my grandmother had a rule that every one of the grandkids had to have a goat at some point, which, actually was a very good rule in hindsight. But this is because of the weekly Torah portion. I've been trying during at least Bereshit to have something that matches the Torah portion in some respect. I think that's going to get harder once we get past the Exodus from Egypt. The narrative gets a little harder to find a graphical representation. So we'll see what happens when we get there. But in this week's Torah portion, with the whole story of Jacob working for Lavan and trying to get his profit in goats, this background was my choice.
Hey, Rabbi, can I ask one more thing real fast? Sorry.
Sure. And then we'll get down to Mishnah.
Like another example would be they cited the rule of writing, which is 2 letters, and the reasoning being there's no Hebrew words that are less than 2 letters. So if you were to write in English, would the rule only be 1 letter?
No, the rule would still be 2. That is the halacha. But we still have d'Rabbanan that we don't write even 1. Remember when we went through Shabbat, which was years ago now, it's hard to remember how long we've been studying together, but the rabbis were very clear about distinguishing between d'oraita and d'Rabbanan, between things that were prohibited according to the Torah directly and things that were prohibited by rabbinic interpretation and additional buffer decree. And the Torah says you are liable for writing when you've written 2, the rabbi's understanding of the Torah, but that doesn't give you permission to write only 1. It just gives you, you're exonerated from the Torah punishments, and now you're only subject to rabbinic punishments. So it's not a get out of jail free card.
Right, but did the rabbis prohibit it because you need 2 letters to make up a word, which is not true in English?
It's a good theory again, but like I said, the idea of what defines writing had to do with the creation of the posts that were used for the Mishkan, and they were the tabernacle, and they were labeled. And in order for the labels to be effective, you had to label 2 items so that you know that they went together. So that was the origin of why you had 2. Labeling 1 post doesn't tell you where it goes. You have to label 2 so you can match them. Insert tab aleph into slot bet.
That was like us putting together the sukkah this year.
Exactly right. And depending upon how complicated your sukkah kit is, I highly recommend putting a piece of tape with writing on it that labels what slot goes where. All right. So we are going to continue in Keritot with the topic of uncertainty. Safek is a great word that comes up a lot in rabbinic law. And we can see it here at the beginning of this Mishnah and throughout the Mishnah. And really, we're going to get a lot of that in our discussion tonight. Safek means doubt. It means uncertainty. But as we're going to see, it's uncertainty with legs to stand on it. It isn't just baseless anxiety. It isn't hand-wringing piety. It is a doubt that was created in a situation. And as such, it needs some rectification. It needs to be dealt with. This is not meant to make us neurotic. This is not meant to make us more uncertain of ourselves, but it is helping us deal with issues where there is doubt. And Judaism recognizes that there are situations where you have doubt. And indeed, for much of the entirety of this Masechet of Keritot, dealing with that kind of doubt is a big subtopic of the entire volume. So let's deal with a little bit of mistaken eating. So we're going to get the basic situation down, then I'll try to describe it in more modern terms. If there is uncertainty whether one ate forbidden fat, an uncertainty whether one did not eat forbidden fat, or even if one ate forbidden fat and there is uncertainty whether there is the measure that determines liability in the piece he ate, and uncertainty whether there is not the measure that determines liability in the piece he ate, he must bring a provisional guilt offering. Right, that's our Asham Talui that we met a couple chapters ago. This is an offering that you bring when you think you might have done something wrong, meaning there's actual evidence that something might have happened, but you are not sure yet, but you are going to verify it eventually one way or another. All right, so let's deal with the particulars of the case before we get to the broad topic. So there are parts of the fat along the abdomen of land mammals that are kosher that we are not allowed to eat. That fat is reserved only for the altar. And as we don't have the altar, we are not throwing it on the altar, but that means we have to just get rid of it. We're not allowed to eat it. Now, in the ancient world, and really almost up until the pre-modern world, depending upon your community, many people would perform shechita. They would do the slaughter for themselves. You didn't have necessarily a community butcher that would butcher everyone's animals. You would do your own. But that meant in addition to the slaughtering, you would have to butcher the animal. And that means you could make a mistake of removing that portion of the animal. You could think that you had removed the fat when in fact you hadn't. And because the fat is identical to non-forbidden fat, a piece of fat looks like a piece of fat, there was a real danger of eating the wrong piece. However, there was also a real need to eat as much fat as you could. I know in the modern world, the word FAT is considered a dirty word for many when they're in their nutrition or diet classes. But for most of human history, you ate every piece of fat you could because you didn't get very much of it. You weren't eating big fatty pieces of meat every night. You weren't eating processed food that had lots of fat added to it. And that meant that fat was precious and it was used and it was eaten wherever possible. That's one reason why it's so hard in the modern world to keep our weight down, because biologically we are programmed to respond very favorably to fat because it was never meant to be in readily available quantities like we currently eat. So just in case you were thinking, well, if there's a danger of eating the wrong fat, why don't we just eat no fat? That is not a biologically good idea for most of human history. You wanted to eat as much fat as you could. You just didn't want to violate the Torah by eating the wrong fat. So here you are, you've got your piece of meat, you've left on it fat that you think is okay, but now you're not sure. Now you're saying, well, wait a minute. When I look at this other piece, it looks like it still has forbidden fat. And weren't these two pieces together? Isn't this part of the next steak over? Maybe I ate the forbidden fat. Or maybe I ate the forbidden fat and now I realize definitely I did. I realize now when I'm comparing the slices of meat and the cuts and what I butchered that I definitely ate some forbidden fat, but I'm not sure how much I ate. Remember, it has to add up to the measure of an olive. And so if I've eaten some, but not enough, then I'm not liable for a sacrifice. But if I've eaten more, then I am. And in case you're wondering why we're talking about this as our particular in Mishnah Keritot, it is because there is the actual prohibition, in the actual prohibition on eating the forbidden fat, it specifically says that this is something that will cut you off, that there will be karet as the punishment for this. So that's why the topic has come up. And here we see that if you have eaten this fat or eaten something that might have been the fat and you have reason to really be doubtful of this, then you need to bring this provisional guilt offering. Situation number 2, technically number 3, but really it's situation number 2, as we'll see. If one has a piece of permitted fat, meaning regular old fat, and a piece of the forbidden fat before him, so you've got 2 of them right there, and you pick up one of them and you throw it into your mouth, and he ate one of them, and he does not know which one of them he ate, right? So there used to be 2 on the plate, or used to be 2 rather on like the bench, and you eat one of them, but you're not sure which one you ate, then you are in trouble, right? For the same reason, because one of them is definitely gone. One of them was definitely eaten, and it's now doubtful because they were both sitting there, which one was the forbidden and which one was permitted. In a similar situation, although it's going to feel wildly different, if his wife and his sister were with him in the house and he unwittingly engaged in intercourse with one of them and does not know with which of them he unwittingly engaged in intercourse, we don't need to get into the specifics of how exactly you could have sex with a person and not know who they were. In case you are wondering, that is exactly in this week's Torah portion how Jacob ended up getting married to Leia. He went into the tent thinking it was Rachel, and when he came out in the morning, he saw it was Leia, and they did what married couples did when they were in the tent. So it is definitely possible to be intimate with someone unwittingly. It could also be that the other person had been unwittingly, and meaning that in this case, the sister might have thought that it was her husband and not realized that it was actually her brother. But suffice it to say, you know that you had sex with someone, and you know that you don't know who it was, and for whatever reason you cannot immediately ascertain who it was, then again, you would have that asham talui, that provisional guilt offering. Situation number 3, if he confused Shabbat with a weekday and performed labor prohibited on Shabbat on one of the days, and he does not know on which of them he performed the labor, in all of the cases, he is to bring a provisional guilt offering, as I've been mentioning throughout. So that last category would be something where it was, I was confused. I realized last weekend I got my days off. Every day was one day off, I think. And I know that I fixed my fence over the weekend, but did I fix it on Sunday or did I fix it on Saturday? That would be another situation where you were confused about the date, and you know you did some work, and you know that if you had done that work on Shabbat, it would be prohibited, but you can't be sure you did it on Shabbat, then that would be another case where you would bring this provisional guilt offering.
What about the festivals? If he's not sure,
yeah.
For example, he thought that was this month was Malay, and suddenly he discovered it was 29, and suddenly, oops, I missed a holiday, or something like that.
So something like that, yes, as long as it was his confusion, right? So the particular example you gave, sometimes a person who lived remotely might have gotten word of when the month was or wasn't happening, and that late, and that could sometimes mess up his count. But in this particular case, it's his own mistake that has caused the doubt, not someone else's mistake. All right. So in all of these cases, these are our 3 different, well, 4, but 2 of them have to do with the forbidden fat versions of places where a person might end up knowing they did something. They know they ate, they know they had sex, they know they did something, they know they built something or did a labor, but they're not sure that they did it in a way that would actually be prohibited. And so therefore, they bring this provisional guilt offering. Now, it's important to see the distinction here between somebody who knows they did something wrong, but did it by mistake, and somebody who did something and they're not sure if what they did was wrong, right? So we're dealing with the second category here. The first category, what's called unwitting or accidental, bishgaga in the technical term, that is handled by a normal guilt offering for when you did something by mistake, right? I know that I built my fence, and now I realize it was definitely on Shabbat. I know that I need to bring a sacrifice for that sin that I did by mistake. That's perfectly fine. It's very clear in Vayikra what you need to do, in Leviticus for what you need to do in that situation. This is, I know I built my fence, but I don't know if building it was wrong because I'm not sure whether I built it on Shabbat or not.
So what is the sacrifice in case that you are not sure? What is the? Is it
that's the chatat. That's the sin offering.
But what is the chatat? What is?
You mean like the? Well, that's the sliding scale depending upon the person.
That was the chatat was the social economical one.
Yes, the progressive taxation, if you will.
Yes. Okay.
to speak like a political scientist.
Yes.
What about his wife or sister? Is he, do they have any obligation? Is he obligated to tell them that they need to possibly do a provisional offering, or are they just?
Yes. So in that particular scenario, they would also be involved. Now, the theoretical, the hypothetical that's involved in this has to have him delayed from finding out the answer long enough that he would need to do this provisional guilt offering before he has to do a real guilt offering when it turns out that it was his sister. So by necessity, the hypothetical situation has to have a pause between him and getting information from the rest of the family. Now, I guess I could, if I'm thinking on the top of my head, come up with, a comedy of errors, tragedy in the real world, where he is sleeping with someone and she thinks it's her husband, and he thinks it's his wife. And the next morning, everybody realizes that something happens, but everybody's too embarrassed to talk about it. And then in which case, both of them would do this provisional guilt offering. But yes, ideally, they should actually be saying, I know I got really drunk last night. Can I ask you, where did you sleep last night? No matter how awkward that conversation is, that's technically what they should be doing.
Well, aside from being drunk, would they actually have any obligation to speak up and say, hey, man, I mean, you're my brother, go back to your own tent or whatever? I mean, how does
yes.
Because aside from being drunk, I don't, from a woman perspective, I don't see this as being possible unless they're like massively drunk.
So it's you have to understand that for many people and for many communities, it was customary and indeed technologically natural to have sex when it was pitch black, because there were no street lamps coming through your window, and you did not have the ubiquitous USB charging light or the smoke detector light or anything else. It would be dark in the tent. Now, is it still possible to be done where people wouldn't even be saying? Yes, there are people that would have engaged in their acts of intimacy without any verbal discussion. I don't want to get too graphic, but certainly there were communities where it was frowned upon to just have too much chit chat while engaged in this type of activity. It's enough of at least a possibility, even if there's no plausibility. Certainly, a person should make sure they're being intimate with the person they plan to be intimate with. That should be the rule of thumb. But even without being blind drunk, it is still hypothetically possible for this to occur. Not plausible, but hypothetical enough. And indeed, as we've talked about in other discussions, the rabbis often like to find the most extreme and improbable circumstances, precisely because that will highlight the edge of where a law will extend. You know, as I like to say, everybody knows that you don't eat pigs. But talking about a pig when you're starving to death on an island, now you begin to see the limits of that prohibition. Everyone knows you don't murder someone and take their wallet. But what happens if somebody is crazy and they're attacking you, and the only way to stop them is to take their life? Now we're reaching an edge of that conversation. So the extreme circumstances may seem bizarre, but it definitely pushes us in trying to understand the topic. And of course, it's a good reminder, always know who you're being intimate with. All right. The next one. Oh, my phone was decided to be really loud. Let me go ahead and mute that so I don't get any additional, no, don't get any additional interruptions like that. All right. So the next one is a little long, as we're going to try and talk about a topic we did a couple weeks ago, where what happens when things are stacked, meaning you've committed multiple problems, but they are bundled together in some way. So let's dive into it. Just as, we're going to do a comparison, just as in a case where one unknowingly ate a piece of forbidden fat and then another piece of forbidden fat in a single lapse of unawareness, right? So it means that you are eating because you think it's fine, and then you eat some more because you still think it's fine. You did not become aware of the problem in the meantime, right? One bite, no problem. 2 bites, no problem. Or maybe it's a problem, but I mean, you're not noticing that there's a problem in between the consumption. He is liable to bring only one sin offering, right? Even though you ate multiple pieces or a multiple quantity, because it was in one act of being unaware, then you only bring one sin offering, which, by the way, to go back to our Shabbat example, would be the same. If I were to hammer together one part of my fence or all of my fence, if I did it all while being completely unaware that it was Shabbat, I would bring only one sin offering when I realized what I had done. So
if you are not sure, go to the end.
If you're not sure what?
Go to the end.
No. If in the middle of your hammering, you suddenly say, wait a minute, is today Shabbat? That does not count as one lapse of awareness, because now you should be going and checking to figure it out. But if you're just out there hammering away and you got your headphones on and you're not noticing anything, then yes, it's technically only one act because of the umbrella of that unawareness. So too, now we get to our application of this. So too in a case where their status is unknown to him, and he ate them both unwittingly during a single lapse of awareness, he is liable to bring only one provisional guilt offering. So the first one is in our category where you definitely know you did something wrong, and then you discover it afterwards. You only have to bring one sacrifice, no matter how many things you did in the middle of that unawareness. The argument here is the same rule applies if you didn't know what you did was right or wrong, but now you are unsure, then you likewise have to bring one provisional guilt offering, not the chatat, but the asham talui. So that is a comparable situation. Does everyone follow that logic? Yes, Aaron.
Yes, Rabbi. Just to refresh my memory, the difference between a hatat and a sham talui, obviously it's a provisional one, but you get to eat the hatat, but not the sham talui, right?
Right, because you don't know whether or not what you're doing is actually forbidden. It's a hedging your bet kind of sacrifice. Right. And if it turns out that what you did wasn't forbidden, then you didn't actually commit a sin. And this is something that maybe we should do a quick break on as well in terms of the overall topic, because a lot of people in the modern world, both Jewish as well as non-Jewish and many other faith communities, like to err on the side of caution which they interpret to mean be as strict as possible in the way that I think you should be. And Jewish law doesn't say that. If you didn't actually sin, then you have no business bringing a sin offering. You can't bring one just in case. However, the rabbis recognized that there might be, what's that?
Like Jonah.
Job, like Eov.
Like Job.
Yes, like Eov. And actually, there are commentaries that are trying to reconcile what he did, because they say, well, it must have been more of a Sham Talui, because he couldn't have been bringing an actual chatat because he didn't know whether there was a sin. And a sin offering without tshuva, without contrition, without repentance, doesn't count either. And you can't repent if you don't know what happened. And he was doing it on behalf of his children, which wouldn't work either because they're the ones who would need to bring it. So yes, Eov was definitely not following normal Jewish law, because it's not assumed that he was Jewish, by the way, which is another conversation. Eov is not considered by most commentaries to be a Jewish character in the Bible. Where was I? Yes. So bringing a sin offering, if you're not 100% sure you actually committed the sin, would be forbidden. You can't just say, well, I'll do it just in case. If you do believe there is enough doubt to wonder whether what you did was a sin, you can bring this additional, this Asham Talui, this provisional guilt offering for sins that would be punishable by karet, which is considered to be like the highest category of transgression. And so the rabbis and the Torah understand that in such a circumstance, a person would want to bring something because of the doubt in that case. But even there has to actually be some reason for the doubt. You can't just say, well, maybe the dinner I had wasn't kosher, with no evidence that there might have been a problem with it. That there has to actually be something about it that would trigger this reaction.
But Rabbi,
yeah.
Again, why can't you eat the Asham Talui?
Because you don't know whether or not you actually did something that would turn it into a chatat, essentially. It right. It's a placeholder, and if you didn't do anything deserving of repentance or of a sacrifice, then eating from it would be partaking of something inappropriately, because you don't have a right to it, if you will.
All right, so it'd be almost. I thought the provisional offering was saying if this is if I did sin, then it's a sacrifice, and if I didn't sin, then it's not a sacrifice. But I thought I remember something there prevents you from eating it, right?
Right. Well, if it's not a sacrifice, then I'm not allowed to eat from it.
Oh, you can't just eat from it because it's food?
You don't cook your dinner on the altar.
Oh, all right.
All right. So with that general reminder that Judaism doesn't believe in strictness as a virtue, and it doesn't believe in leniency as a virtue. It believes in doing the hard work of actually figuring out what you're supposed to do as the virtue, which I know a lot of people don't like, especially in the modern world, where people would rather just have a yes or a no rather than it depends. We continue. But if he had gained knowledge between the first and second instance that there is a possibility the fat might be prohibited, then the halacha is different, right? If he eats from it, and then he realizes that it might be wrong, and then he eats again, well, the rule is going to be different. Just as he would be liable to bring a sin offering for each and every piece when he gained knowledge of their prohibited status in between each act of consumption, so too, he must bring a provisional guilt offering for each and every instance in which he consumed food that might be forbidden after learning of their uncertain status in between each unwitting act of consumption. All right, that's a very long way of expanding upon a very short Mishnah, which I'm going to have to expand on additionally. So if we're using the basic sin category, if you are eating from forbidden fat and you take a bite and you put your fork down and your brother comes in and says, wait a minute, isn't that forbidden fat? Aren't you eating from such and such piece of that cow? And you go, you know what? maybe I am, and you eat again, you now have to bring 2 sin offerings for the 2 acts because you were unaware for the first one, and now you are unaware because it's still a maybe for the second one. You have to bring 2 separate acts because you should have actually figured it out before you ate that second piece. But because you still didn't know, you are bringing a chatat, an inadvertent sin offering, rather than being punished for a willful violation. If you said, on the other hand, yeah, I know now, and boy, isn't it tasty, let me have another, then that's a different punishment. This is still where you are in a state of, I'm not sure. However, category number 2, our topic in Keritot, if you realize that there might be a possibility that what you have done is wrong, right? You ate from the first one without knowing that there was this issue, but then you become aware that, wait, there's that other piece, and that one might be, and then you go back into doing it again, then that would be a double asham talui. Yes, sir.
Rabbi, I'm just having trouble keeping track of
Yes.
2 weeks ago. It seems like I cannot find out when on the state of unconsciousness, in a single state of unconsciousness, they make you do multiple offerings versus one, because it does not seem there's any real principles that apply there as discussed at the beginning of when we started Zoom.
Right. So, I think at some point we're going to have to go back and review that section from Shabbat, because that's where I know the most clear delineation of bundling and unbundling different types of transgressions. But the general rule of thumb is that if there is a single period of ignorance, that every act under it that is the same is bundled, and every act under it that is different is separate, even though it's under one act of unknowingness, unawareness. Right. So that's sort of like the general rule. But then you get into the argument of what counts as a time of unawareness and what counts as transgressions which can be bundled and ones which cannot be bundled. And in fact, that's going to be the next section of this Mishnah, where we're going to look at a bunch of eating, which is seemingly all bundled, but eating of different prohibitions during that period of unawareness. So we're going to see things that might be bundled or might not be bundled, depending upon the argument.
Right, but 2 weeks ago, didn't we see a bunch of stuff that were within the same bundle, but you had to make multiple offerings in the same state of unawareness? I forget, that was like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Right. So we were talking about a bunch of acts of intimacy where a person might be in violation of multiple issues. And indeed, their argument also was, and it is complicated, of which one of those might be bundled and which ones would not be bundled. So let's take a look at this next section where we deal with a bunch of eatings that are prohibited, and we'll see how they get handled. All right, just as in a case where one ate forbidden fat and blood and pigul and notar. Pigul and notar are 2 different versions from the sacrifice that you are not allowed to eat. The eating it outside of the appropriate time and place. So it would have been prohibited. It would have been permitted, but now it's not. So if you ate all of that during one lapse of awareness, he is liable to bring a sin offering for each and every one. Right? One sin offering for the fat, one sin offering for the blood, one sin offering for the pigul, one sin offering for the notar, because it was one umbrella of unawareness. He doesn't get off with only one sacrifice because he committed 4 different transgressions. And they are 4 unique and separate types of transgression, even though you might have thought they were all just eating. Because they are 4 distinct transgressions, he has to bring 4 different sacrifices. And so too, to apply to our case here, with regard to a case where their status is unknown to him and he ate them unwittingly during the one lapse of awareness, he must bring a provisional guilt offering for each and every item. Worst buffet line ever, because now he's on the hook for 4 sacrifices. So that parallel continues. Likewise, if one has pieces of forbidden fat and notar before him, and he ate one of them, and he does not know which one of them he ate. So notice here, he ate from one of them. That is to say, he realized after he ate that he was eating from one of them, and he realized that both of them were forbidden, but were forbidden for different reasons, right? So he knows he's done something wrong, but he doesn't know what he's done wrong. Maybe he ate forbidden fat, maybe he ate notar, but he definitely ate one of them, right? Hold that thought. Or, similar situation, his menstruating wife and his sister were with him in the house, and he unwittingly engaged in intercourse with one of them, and he does not know with which one of them he unwittingly engaged in intercourse. He knows he had sex with someone, and he knows that he wasn't supposed to be with his wife because it was during Nida, and he knows he wasn't supposed to be with his sister because it's his sister. He is in a similar situation to the one who ate from the 2 forbidden items. Or if Shabbat and Yom Kippur occurred adjacent to one another, and he performed prohibited labor during the intervening twilight period, meaning that he doesn't know on which of the days he performed the labor, right? So he knows he did something on either Shabbat or Yom Kippur. Again, he didn't do it on purpose for one of them, but now that he looks back, he knows he did it on one of them, but he's not sure which because it was in that time between them. In all of these cases, excuse me, let me roll this down. In all of these cases, now I lost my place. Rabbi Eliezer deems the transgressor liable to bring a sin offering, right? As he certainly sinned. So Rabbi Eliezer says, look, you either did notar or you did forbidden fat. Either way, you definitely sinned. That we know that, right? From all of these categories that we just went through, there was definitely a transgression. We just can't determine which transgression. And Rabbi Eliezer says, we know you did something wrong. Bring a sin offering because we know you did something wrong. And Rabbi Yoshua says, no, he is exempt because he doesn't know the nature of his sin. Now, not knowing the nature of his sin means that he can't actually bring a kavanah, intention to the sacrifice. What exactly is he sacrificing the sin offering for? Is he sacrificing it because of the fat, or is he sacrificing it because of the notar? How can he repent if he doesn't know what he did? He knows he did something, but without knowing exactly what, tshuva doesn't work. So Rabbi Yoshua says, you can't bring an offering under that case. It doesn't mean that he's like off the hook, he did nothing wrong. It means that the usual remedy of bringing a chatat, a sin offering, won't work in this case. All right, we're going to continue with these 2 guys in just a second, but I want to make sure we're clear on that point up to this point. All right. Rabbi Yossi, go ahead.
So bottom line between both of them is that
we're not at the bottom line yet.
Oh.
Because we're going to get other people arguing about them.
Okay.
So we're not at the end of this topic, but I want to make sure you both understand at least the basic idea behind each person's position, right? Rabbi Eliezer says you did something wrong, so you have to bring an offering, and Rabbi Yoshua says, but you can't bring an offering without knowing what exactly you did, because otherwise, what are you repenting about?
So Rabbi Yeshua make more sense is because it's the batala. If you bring a sacrifice, it's because you know what you did wrong and you try to fix it and you realize. But if you don't know what, there's no way. So for me, it's clear it's Rabbi Yeshua the winner. I don't know if it's winners, but not because your name is Rabbi Yeshua neither.
Oh, well, as a Yoshua, I'm not going to play favorites. Thankfully, the Mishnah does that for me. But Rabbi Eliezer does have a position, however, that a person who did something wrong does need to bring a chatat. They need, and they should want to make things right and to rectify it. And maybe we could say that you could, confess to both of them on one offering and say, for A or B, God, let this be my sacrifice. Maybe we could work it that way, because it was one act, so you only need one sacrifice. But couldn't it cover either of them? I mean, come on, God doesn't know, and God knows I'm sorry regardless of what I did, because I messed up, and I realize I messed up. That's why I'm here with the offering. So let's not put Rabbi Eliezer out of the race before we've started. That there is some meat on the bone of his argument. Rabbi Yoshua, with some modifications, is eventually going to win. I'll just give the spoiler, but let's not count Rabbi Eliezer out of the fight just yet. Yes, Aaron.
Just out of curiosity, how come the sacrifice can't act as a double provisional offering?
Well, here we know that he did something wrong, right? With regards to the provisional offerings, the Asham Talui, we don't know if there was a sin. In all of the cases that we just listed, we know there was a sin. We just don't know which sin. And so that means you can't bring a provisional, because the provisional is only when you're not sure if any sin took place at all.
Right. You couldn't do one that would be provisional for each sin, for both sins? If you know only one.
I think the idea, I get where you're coming at, that you don't know whether you sinned at all with the notar. You don't know whether you sinned at all with the forbidden fat. So I'll bring in a Sham Talui for both of them. But I think the argument is, but we know you did do something. And the Asham Talui wasn't supposed to be for a known transgression, meaning that there was a transgression. It was supposed to be when the transgression itself was a question mark. And there's not a question mark in this case. We definitely know there was a transgression. The plate is empty. The bed was slept on. The labor was done. It's just a question of under what category did I sin and how do I fix it?
Right. And the reason I brought that up is because of the repentance we were saying. So you can, I take it you repent when you do the Asham Talui, right?
No, not exactly, because it's different, because you can't repent about something that you don't know that you did. You know you might have done it. Maybe I ate the forbidden fat, but maybe I didn't. On the plate there was more than one type of fat, and I can't tell which one I ate. So I can't repent if I don't know I actually committed a transgression.
If there's no repentance, how could it be a valid sacrifice in any situation then?
And well, that's why it is this weird Asham Talui, this provisional sacrifice. It's why it is in this nebulous area, and it's why it's limited to these unique situations of Keritot, where you're worried about karet. And so there is this idea that you need to do something to answer this type of doubt. In most cases of doubt, you don't do anything. If you don't know whether you actually did anything on Shabbat or not, then you would just Shabbat's not a good example. If you don't know whether you in a business deal, right? Let's say that you counted out the change and you gave it to the customer, and the customer leaves, and then you are counting up your cash register at the end of the day, and you're not sure. Wait, did I give him the wrong change? Or did someone else give me too much? Or did someone take too much? But you begin to have a doubt that maybe you did something wrong. In those cases, you don't have to bring the Asham Talui, and you don't have to bring a chatat, obviously. You just need to be more careful with your bookkeeping. It's really linked to this issue of karet that we're being this extra careful on.
But if it's linked to the issue of karet, though, how would one of the rabbis come down with the conclusion that you don't have to do anything? I know that's not the winning opinion, but
Well, this is not, so this one is in the second half of this Mishnah. This one is not about those topics. So that's what makes this whole section really complicated, is we jump back and forth between Asham Talui, the provisional offering, and the Chatat, the sin offering. And right now we're dealing with actual sin offerings, not the provisional. So everything I just said about the maybe, that's not actually what's on the table at the precise moment of what we're dealing with. For the precise moment, we're dealing with an actual sin offering because there was an actual transgression. Everybody agrees something went wrong. We're just not sure what went wrong precisely, and thus we're not sure exactly how to deal with it. So let's deal with that argument, and maybe we'll come closer to an understanding by the end. So Rabbi Yosei said, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua did not disagree with regard to one who performed prohibited labor during the intervening twilight period, because they concur, that he is exempt, right? So for that unique situation, Rabbi Yossi says, actually, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua aren't arguing. Now, why are they not arguing? Why do they both agree that it's more like what Rabbi Yehoshua says, that he is exempt? Because, as I say, he performed part of the labor today, and he performed part of the labor the following day, right? The most likely circumstance, if he did it during Bein Hashmashot, this twilight period, is that the labor didn't happen only on Yom Kippur or only on Shabbat, that instead it probably happened on both of them. And thus it would not be a twilight issue. It would be a Shabbat violation and a Yom Kippur violation. With regard to what case did they disagree? What are we arguing about? Meaning with regards to Shabbat and Yom Kippur, because we mentioned that, so it has to be some Shabbat and Yom Kippur argument. With regard to the case of one who performs prohibited labor in the midst of the day, and he does not know whether it was on Shabbat that he performed the labor or whether it was on Yom Kippur that he performed the labor. Or, different situation, but same issue, with regard to one who performed a prohibited labor and he does not know which labor he performed, which is harder to imagine, that you're not 100% sure which of the melachot you did that were wrong, but let's focus on the one where he did it, and it was a bright, sunny day, but now he can't remember whether it was Shabbat or Yom Kippur, but he knows it was one of them, so he knows he did something wrong. That's the case, says Rabbi Yossi, that Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua are arguing about with regards to Shabbat and Yom Kippur. And why are they arguing? As, in those cases, Rabbi Eliezer deems him liable to bring a sin offering, and Rabbi Yehoshua deems him exempt. Now, Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Yehoshua would deem him exempt even from bringing a provisional guilt offering. That in such a circumstance, Rabbi Yehoshua goes even further than saying you don't have to bring a chatat, but says you don't have to bring an asham talui at all, because the doubt is even more extreme in that particular circumstance, because it is possible that you are completely off. And indeed, the halacha goes according to Rabbi Yehoshua with Rabbi Yehuda's tweak to the argument. That's where we end up. Now, this is very, very confusing, and I get that. And I have to say that I had to go over this multiple times, and I'm still not 100% sure that my tongue has been cooperating and I've said everything perfectly right, because these positions are very, very, very tricky. And going back and forth between the multiple opinions and what they say in different circumstances, it is easy to lose track of the different positions. This is a little bit more of a taste, by the way, of what it looks like when studying the Bavli, the Talmud, because they will engage in this type of analysis more than we see in the Mishnah. All right, so I think we're going to have to end up leaving it here because I kind of hoped that we'd get through chapter 4, but Mishnah 3 is continuing on with this conversation. So we're going to hopefully carry on, but it's still going to be challenging, so to speak, Let's go ahead and pause, and we'll save Mishnah 3 for next week, because I think I've confused people enough for one day. Hopefully, some of the basic outline of the ideas of doubt and of trying to rectify the doubt and the different types of doubt. Hopefully, we're getting at least a feel for that for our own personal life and going on in terms of applying Mishnah as ourselves. Since we are not bringing sacrifices, we should still nonetheless be aware of the transgression so that we can perform tshuva, and be careful that we are both holding ourselves accountable for what we did, or at least probably might have done, but not beating ourselves up for things that we have no reason to think that we might have done. We should walk a line between neurosis and ignorant self-confidence. And with that, I will wish you a good evening, and we will continue next Wednesday. Take care, everyone. Be well, and I will see you next time.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, for the show.
Thanks,
I was
bye.
on the site, but I was listening everything.
Very good. Thank you for all being here.
I allow Aaron to ask a question that he loves his time, okay? I was
Exactly.
between your shiur, business, cooking, very busy.
You know, it's a good example, by the way, and I'll leave this with a very sort of positive message. It's a good example that you can cook, do business, and study, and you don't have to do only one. Too many people say, "Oh, I'll study when I finish with X, or I'll study when I have more time." You can find ways to squeeze it in, and what you just described is a very good example. No, it may not be always perfect, but you know what? Trying to squeeze it in, the merit, the zechut for doing that is wonderful, because that's how we grow as a person as well as growing as a scholar.
Actually, today I was studying with another Hebruta about that for Torah, the effort give you the credit.
Absolutely, which is again something as a reminder to everyone. You're not weighed in the balance of God's scale for how much Torah you remember. You're weighed in the balance of the scale for how much Torah you tried to learn. Right? God is not going to criticize us because we have faulty memories. God isn't going to, not give us a proper reward just because maybe we weren't naturally talented in memorizing this material. God will reward us for the effort we put in for trying to master the material.
Yeah.
Rabbi.
Yes, sir.
I had a side question. Just out of curiosity, is it easier to learn this on the USCJ version, since it's kind of chunked out and put into chunks instead of just all thrown out there at once?
That's a great question about formatting. I would say that I found both of them to be very helpful. This translation, because of the way it is put together, it often provides an easier to read sentence format than the USCJ translation. But like you said, the USCJ translation has a more user-friendly text and more user-friendly commentary. So both of them are good. As always, I recommend to all of our students, use every resource you have available. And for those of you who are watching, if you didn't know, there is the USCJ commentary. It's called English Explanation of Mishnah. And if you click on that, it's right here in Sefaria, giving you the section 1, 2, and 3 commentary. So you can have the best of both worlds.
How do you know what the sections 1, 2, and 3 is?
I believe that if you look at the text, it is fairly self-explanatory of which one is which. But you're right, I don't think they label them explicitly.
Oh.
But as you can see, if you're eating foods that carry different prohibitions, then you know that you're going to be dealing with our issue of fat, blood, pigul, and notar. So some of it's going to be a little bit by context. All right. So again, thank you all for studying, and don't be discouraged if this was a little bit of a head scratcher. That's okay. Maybe the next time we come back to this in a few years, it'll seem a little clearer because you'll have more knowledge, and maybe I'll have a better way to explain it. That's the joy of studying. Take care, everyone, and good night.